This last video is about population growth graphs. There are different ways that we represent populations growing over time, and there's four major groups that we'll talk about. The first one is something that isn't maintained for very long. This is referred to as exponential growth. Just like before when we looked at a graph, the first thing you have to do is look at the x and the y-axis to figure out what it's showing you. So on our x-axis, the one that's running across here, we have time. So as time increases, we move across the graph. Population size is going up the graph. So if we look here, the population size is relatively small in the beginning, but then eventually it takes off at a very, very quick growth rate and very rapidly gets very, very big. What we're seeing here in this case is a population that grows what we call exponentially. Exponential growth is a period of slow growth in the beginning, followed by a period of explosive growth later on. An example of this is actually the human population. The human population's been growing exponentially since around the Industrial Revolution. So for a long time we had a small population, and now all of a sudden the population is taking off at a very, very quick rate. One of the things that's a little scary about that is that we know from nature that exponential growth is never maintained indefinitely, meaning that this line that represents the population will eventually level off, which means eventually the human population will stop growing, and we're going to end up showing what's called a period of logistic growth. So if we look at this one, a logistic growth diagram has the same x and y axis, right? It still has time and population size. There's this period of exponential growth, but then eventually the population levels off. It hits what's called its carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is like the maximum number of individuals that a population can withstand or that it can sustain. So we end up then with is a stable population size. So we end up with this line kind of leveling off. So we end up with our ideal sized population. There are some things that are called limiting factors. It's shown here as like a weight sort of holding the population down. So water could be one. For people, it's most likely not going to be water. For space, is there going to be too much area for us? Possibly, but probably not that one either. The big one that's probably going to be an issue for us is food. Are we going to be able to keep feeding this ever-increasing population? Predators aren't that big of an issue for people, and then a lot of people look at this one as the answer. Disease will become a problem as people end up living in closer areas. Disease is more likely to spread, if we're living in a more dense population area, and then also the idea that antibiotics aren't working as well now as they've worked in the past. But what we're looking at here is basically just a population that grows very quickly initially and then ends up leveling off once it reaches what we're, again, calling carrying capacity, that maximum number of individuals that the population can hold. Now, even though I said some of these won't be an issue for people, there are still things you should know because this can apply to species in the natural environment as well. I'm just applying it to people because we're a very good example of exponential growth, but this can apply to any population that you're looking at. There are a few other different growth models that we see because not everything grows exponentially, so not everything's going to fall into those two population examples. Something else is referred to as the rise and crash model. So again, we've got time in years at the bottom and then population size on the left. What this is showing you for these individual, I guess they're reindeer, right? So we got reindeer herds. The reindeer herd was at a relatively low population. Then they had this rise and followed by a crash. So if you think about our logistic growth diagram and you consider, well, geez, what could cause their population to crash? Most likely this was due to either a change in resources, food or water, or a change in predation. So there are predators that keep the reindeer population in check. Maybe something happened to the predator population here and their population dropped off. So the reindeer population got really high. Then when the predator population comes back up, the reindeer population starts dropping back off again. But we see this with a lot of different species where they'll sort of rise during one set of conditions and then crash later on during another set. Something that would be an example of this would be something like locusts. So locusts have a very quick population rise as they're reproducing. They eat all the food in an area, and then their population crashes, and they go back down to having very, very low numbers. The last one that we'll look at then is referred to as a fluctuating population growth. So in this example, Still got time down here, but notice it's different. It's days now instead of years, and then population size is on the left-hand side. So this is a population that's going to fluctuate very dramatically. You can see the population goes up and then down and up and then down, and it's doing that over a course of just a few days. This would apply to something like bacteria or insects especially, where their population just fluctuates dramatically. Another thing that could apply here, it wouldn't necessarily be on the same day scale, but the graph itself would look kind of similar, would be if we were talking about the reproduction of a species that reproduces very quickly, like say something like rabbits. Rabbits have a gestation period of 31 days. For people it takes 9 months to have a baby develop and to have kids. For rabbits, it's 31 days, and they obviously give birth to a litter of offspring instead of just one or two. So their population can actually fluctuate like this pretty dramatically, because there will be a predator, say something like foxes or things like that end up eating the rabbits, so that'll drive their population down, but more rabbits are born, and the population goes back up, and then more of them get eaten, and then more are born, and so on, and their population just fluctuates like this. Typically, a species that's a prey species is going to have a less stable population, and it's going to have more of this fluctuating look to it, because they're giving birth to a lot of individuals, but a lot of those individuals are then being eaten by the predators that are around as well. So those are our four main types. The main thing that you should be able to do is just briefly describe each one. If you think about, again, the names, I know I talked to you about this in some other videos, but if you just think about the names, that kind of helps you remember what the graph is doing, like fluctuating. Well, something that's fluctuating is inconsistent. Well, this one's definitely inconsistent. It's going up and down as we work our way through the graph. If you think of rise and crash, I think that one's probably the easiest one to remember, because they have a population increase, and then there's some kind of change, and the population crashes again, goes back down to being relatively low. The exponential growth one is tough because it's probably a new term for you. But remember, this is the one where the population starts off very slowly and then grows very, very quickly near the end. And keep in mind, this cannot be sustained forever. Because if you think about the population getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger like this, they're eventually going to run out of resources somewhere up there. Once they run out of resources, that's what we call their carrying capacity. And the population then begins to level off. They get a stable population size because of some type of limiting factor that's then controlling their growth. Right? So if you just understand the main four models here that we're seeing for population growth graphs, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch, and make sure you check out the next video. Thanks.